Guys, I am Jerome Armstrong, and I'm going to be flying solo today on the Composition Consultant YouTube channel. First of all, I want to thank everybody for taking time out of their busy and productive days to come here for the Carnivore Muscle Ramblings. Jonathan is unfortunately a bit under the weather. However, I want you guys to know that he is doing okay. There's no cause for concern. The man just holds himself to exceedingly high personal and professional standards, and he wasn't sure if he would be capable of providing the quality of information at the level that only he can do tonight. So he asked me to step in and host this one solo today. So that's why I am here. So let's see who's in the chat. If you guys can hear me okay, I'm doing the audio a little bit differently. Either do a 1 or a thumbs up or let me know in the chat. I see Zbigniew was number 1, first guy here. Hi, folks. Have a nice evening. Have a wonderful Easter. Same to you, buddy. I see that Rick is here. Look forward to my duck egg hunt. And look who it is, Jonathan. Jonathan, I appreciate you letting me step in. I consider that a huge honor, and I'm extremely flattered for this opportunity. Thank you. So until we get some questions, I want everybody to just let me know what you have going on for your Easter plans. I would love to hear what you guys are up to. Rick has a duck egg hunt. That's fantastic. I'm jealous. Duck eggs are extremely delicious. Nomad in the chat. Nomad, how you doing, buddy? All right. I heard about the GPT. You're talking about Chat GPT. Have you used it at all? I find myself going on there almost daily to just ask all sorts of random questions and see how it turns out. Most of the time, it does things pretty well. Echo chamber. Okay. I went into the settings for my microphone, and I have the StreamYard's built-in echo cancellation turned on. Excuse me. I unfortunately can't hear myself at all through my headphones, so unfortunately I have no clue as to the quality of the audio. Zbigniew says, all is wonderful. Glad to hear it. Keep the training footage coming on the Carnivore Coaching Corner, or sorry, the Carnivore Crew Facebook group. Excuse me, I misspoke. For those who may listen to this in retrospect and are not a part of the group, we are currently near the beginning of month 2 of our 4-month private Facebook group, and the camaraderie has been fantastic. There's a number of individuals that have put up training footage. There's a lot of support. Everybody's got this beautiful, unique story, and seeing not just the level of intelligence, but the encouragement that's going from one person to the other has just been really awesome to see. Rick saying hi to Jonathan. Yeah, the original only carnivore bodybuilder. I unfortunately am only a shallow, empty husk of a man compared to Jonathan's knowledge and experience, and to some extent his physique. So, Jonathan, thank you again for this opportunity. Zbigniew says, what are your thoughts on pre-exhaustion technique? That's an excellent question. So the way that I generally look at things like pre-exhaust or other set intensifiers is I generally place them in the context of they are tools used to properly teach clients or people that you're training with how to naturally raise their own level of intensity. I think you could probably get most, if not almost all of the same degree of results just going to concentric failure. But during certain exercises, depending on the equipment that you're using, depending on the resistance curve provided by the machine or the tool, you might find that you're hitting fatigue at different positions in the range of movement, and that can be somewhat indicative of a number of things. It could be design fault. Maybe if you have a machine that's not properly cammed to match the strength curve of the exercise, you could fatigue at a different point that might give the illusion of momentary muscular failure, in which case doing something like a pre-exhaust could be a good idea. I tend to use pre-exhaust quite a bit in almost a therapeutic sense with people. So here in my studio, I have a number of people with carpal tunnel and rheumatoid arthritis. And because of those conditions with the inflammation and the joint pain that they often feel, a lot of times for them, doing a heavy chest press or a leg press can be too much pressure on their joints, and it can be really, really uncomfortable. So a lot of times what I'll do with people that have joint issues like that is I'll do a pre-exhaust exercise first and then immediately superset it. So 0 rest from the pre-exhaust exercise right into a more compound movement. So I might do a leg extension to momentary muscular failure that pre-exhausts right before a leg press. Otherwise, I have a lot of clients with wrist issues that struggle on a chest press. I will do a chest fly movement to momentary muscular failure to pre-exhaust the chest, so that by the time they get to the chest movement, their chest is largely fried. And at that point, a lot of the assistance that's being done is being performed by the anterior delts and the triceps. In terms of how much fatigue a proper pre-exhaust set can inroad the targeted musculature, I found that doing a pre-exhaust set to momentary muscular failure often reduces the amount of weight on the following compound exercise by between 40 and 50%. So if I have somebody that normally chest presses 100 pounds, if I pre-exhaust them with a pec deck or chest fly type movement, and then immediately have them go from the pre-exhaust exercise to the compound chest press, oftentimes they're so heavily fatigued that by the time they get onto the chest press, they're doing 50 or 60 pounds. Now, assuming you don't have any training limitations, I think pre-exhaust can be a really effective tool sometimes, not necessarily to build more muscle, but in a lot of ways to develop more of that mind-muscle connection, that proprioception of what muscles am I working in certain movements. So same kind of thing, if you do a chest fly movement and immediately do some kind of compound chest movement after that, sometimes you feel that a lot more in your chest, and being more aware of your body as you move against resistance, I think is always a positive thing. So speaking of, I hope that answers your question. Rick says that the chat crashed and he had to restart. Well, I hope everything sounds okay now. Jonathan said, done all I can on my end to resolve the minor echo. Proximity to mic might improve the situation. Yeah, I'll have to figure something out with some of these. I have a Blue Yeti microphone that I use most of the time when doing these videos with Jonathan. And I thought due to the sensitivity, I was getting some echo off of the wall behind me. But I don't want to sit egregiously close, to the webcam that's built into this laptop either. So hopefully it's listenable. Rick says, my ducks love to hide their eggs. They do. But given that, you're one of many predators, that's only natural. Nomad says, I'm thinking it's your speaker echoing. Perhaps use headphones. Yeah, I made sure that I have the audio coming through in my headphones. There should be no direct desktop audio playing as I'm doing this. Jonathan says, I wish I had the triceps of Jerome and the head of hair. You've got a really good pair of triceps. I think if I understood you correctly, you said one of them isn't very great, right? Do you have an asymmetry there, Jonathan? Thanks. I wish your legs for your size are insane. So I'm a little bit jealous there, but my legs are pretty decent too. I wish I had the back thickness. I have pictures on Instagram. My lats are somewhat asymmetrical. So I have one lat attachment that is significantly higher than the other. So I know every time that I'm on stage and I do any kind of lat spread, rear double bicep pose, even standing relaxed from the rear, I can tell that I'm probably losing points because of my asymmetry compared to other guys. Shave that shit off. Are you talking about this? I did this as I was dieting down for this competition, mostly so I can hide how gaunt my face tends to get as I get really close to contest shape. I would never wear a beard on the actual contest day because I just don't want to get all that fake tan in my facial hair. But at least for me, I figure it's kind of a rare opportunity that I have in my life to grow a beard for a little bit. I generally like shaving, unless you were talking to Jonathan. So, been shaving your head for 23 years. I probably look tough as hell then. It's one of those classic, timeless, tough guy looks that, at least for now, I'm happy that I still have hair at 37, but I know at some point it'll probably be gone. And I'm sure I'll do the same thing. I think I'd rather have a completely clean shaved head than rocking the George Costanza look. That's a fantastic screen name. Forearm grip training frequency. Can you do daily like calves? You could do it daily like calves. I don't think I would recommend you train anything daily. The conventional fitness and bodybuilding wisdom is that smaller muscle groups like the calves, sometimes the forearms, and the abdominals can be trained daily. But what makes a muscle grow, regardless of muscle fiber type, whether it's more slow twitch dominant or fast twitch dominant, is you're creating the stimulus with what you do in the gym, but then you grow during recovery. So I know there's a stigma that calves are a stubborn muscle group and you have to train them daily to really get them to grow. But I look at them the same way I look at any other muscle group. Train them hard, train them heavy, and then you have to give them time to recover. Going back to, I think 1981, or sorry, no, even earlier, in 1979, so Frank Zane ended up winning the 1979 Olympia. He was in the light heavyweight class, and Mike Mentzer was in the heavyweight class. There was over 200 and under 200 pound weight classes. Mentzer ended up winning the pre-judging, but then lost at the evening show. And even after that competition, Zane solicited Mike for advice on growing his calves. And Mike basically recommended that Frank reduce his volume and frequency down to, I think, 3 days a week compared to what Frank was training them. And Frank, for the 81 Olympia, I think 81, no, 1980, because they skipped the 81. Frank Zane in the 1980 Olympia credited Mike Mentzer's tips for helping him grow a half inch on his calves. So I actually think most people that are struggling to develop bigger calves, it makes sense in a certain way that we think we need to give them more training volume and frequency, but I think in a lot of ways that's hindering growth and that's hindering progress. So I don't give calves any more volume or any more frequency that I do any other muscle group. The same fundamental principles that cause one muscle group to grow, I think, applies to other muscle groups, regardless of muscle fiber composition. As far as when I train forearm or grip work, I do it relatively instinctually. So depending on my workout split, right now I'm doing a push-pull leg split, but for clients that I have, or on the rare chance that I do full body workouts, I'll just kind of mix in a number of kind of accessory movements as I feel necessary for that day. And those accessory movements might be neck flexion or extension, lateral flexion, some direct lower back work, abdominal work, forearm flexion, extension, grip work, or possibly dorsiflexion for the calves, which is just pulling your toe upwards. I work those relatively infrequently, but if it's an area that you want to bring up, I would probably, do forearm and grip work on the days that you do your back movements. If you have a pushing movement or more of a chest day, the forearms aren't really going to get a lot of direct work that day. So I think it makes more sense to lump those muscle groups onto the tail end of your back or your biceps workouts. And grip work doesn't have to be overly complicated. I highly recommend time static contractions for 90 seconds doing grip work, and I'll put out a time static contraction video soon. But basically, you're gradually increasing the effort that you're exerting over certain time intervals so that you're reaching a point after about 90 seconds where you're squeezing something as hard as you possibly can. So I would lump however frequently you're doing back or biceps, I would probably just add some degree of wrist flexion, some wrist extension, and grip work on the tail end of that workout. Hope that answers your question. All right, where was I? I feel like Bart and Jonathan sometimes, where things get lost in the chat and they lose track over their places. Why do people worry so much about the amount of hair that they have? I think everybody is self-conscious about different things, right? So for me, I was in speech therapy when I was really young, like 4 or 5 years old. I had a really hard time pronouncing my R's. So with a name like Jerome, everybody thought my name was Jerome. And I became very introverted because so many people had a hard time understanding what I was saying. And I slurred my words a lot, even outside of that. And it took, well into my adult years before I really felt even comfortable doing interviews, speaking to people, making eye contact. A lot of people say I always look stoned or tired. I just have hooded eyelids. I think everybody has something that they're self-conscious of. And it kind of affects everybody to different degrees. Maybe Rick is just, an alpha stud male who doesn't give a shit what anybody thinks about him. But I think everybody's got a few things about themselves. And ironically, bodybuilders might be some of the most self-conscious people of all, and just kind of gym culture in general. When somebody first benches 185, they want to get to 225. You get 225 on the bench, the next thing you want to get is to 315. I know a guy that benched 405, and then his next goal, like a week later, is, oh, now I got to get up to 500-pound bench. And bodybuilders are the same way. We're always trying to look at our physique and try and make it just a little bit more perfect. My biceps are 17 and a quarter inches. I would love to get them up to 17 and a half inches, but I suspect I'm probably very close to my genetic potential in that regard. So everybody's got something, I think, that we're all kind of self-conscious about. It could be a little bit more aesthetic. It could be more personality traits. It could be our bank statement. We all have things that are a little bit sensitive. Carl, it's Jonathan's brother, right? Do you have a favorite training plan that you found or stumbled upon in a magazine site or seminar, Y3T, FST7? Yeah, everything works. And I admit that I've always been a little bit biased in that I've always done less volume compared to most conventional bodybuilding training programs. When I was 13 or so, and I lifted weights kind of intermittently, I very early in my life got a copy of Arnold Schwarzenegger's The Encyclopedia of Modern Bodybuilding. And I remember exercising at the YMCA. My mom or my dad would take me. And those routines beat me up. And the routine that I really found that worked well for a long time, earlier in my life, was called Max OT. It was a lot of just basic compound lifts, almost entirely free weight movements, 4 to 6 repetitions, for the most part, anywhere from 3 to total 7 sets per body part. And each body part was essentially trained once per week. And I followed that routine for a long time. And a lot of my lifts were really, really good, but I could never get past certain thresholds. And like my bench press was really never that great. So my bench, I could never get it past 230. And I know for some people that's a lot of weight. For some people and for someone that lifts a lot of weights, that's really, 230 is not a lot on the bench. And that's a combination of me having longer arms. Perhaps a lot of that was execution as well. But it wasn't until later in my life when I ended up trying high intensity training. And I've told the story before about what set me down that path, that I was very quickly, within a few months of even further reducing my volume and frequency, that I was able to push through that number quite easily. So my best bench press was incline was 275 for 3 reps, but they were 5 or 6 seconds up or down. It was very, very slow repetitions. So who knows how that would actually equate to a flat bench or more conventional repetitions. But the thing is, like, everything works. And I know that I'm a huge proponent of limited volume, limited frequency, kind of taking more of the minimal effective dose approach to exercise. But there are guys that build incredible physiques using virtually every single type of training routine. And as long as you're training, progressively and intensely and consistently at a volume and frequency that you can recover from, as long as you're meeting those 5 criteria, any routine that you follow is going to produce results. Now, not all of those routines are equally effective. Not all of those routines are equally safe or productive. But any routine can produce results. And that's because every single weightlifting routine at least adheres to the same basic fundamental principles of physiology that produce those positive changes in size and strength to begin with. So Max OT is kind of what really did it for me, at least for a number of years. And then later I trained Mike Mentzer heavy duty. And since training heavy duty style, I basically reached a point where I didn't want to do bench, squat, or deadlifts anymore, because the weight that I was using, I didn't think the reward was worth the risk. And that's what led me to trying more of the super slow style of exercise. And I've been training that way for probably at least 5 years now. And at least for me, I've found that I've had no decrease in strength and certainly no decrease in muscle mass. If anything, I've continued to build muscle mass, slowing the repetitions down and further reducing the volume and frequency with which I train. Okay, so Nomad was talking about Jonathan. Jonathan, I think, still has great hair. Like, my hair is kind of like ginger colored. I've got a little gray coming in. Jonathan has beautiful blonde hair. It's not like brownish with red hints that I have. So Zbigniew, coming back to failure training, been thinking the given muscle is weakest in a positive movement, stronger in the holding, and strongest in the negative. It's true. Um, and I've said this before, should you take things beyond concentric failure? I think the benefit past that point is very, very slight. But with that slight possible benefit comes a disproportionately large inroad to your recovery ability. So I don't think most people, if you truly reach concentric failure, or for most people, even the point, what I like to call technical failure, when your form starts breaking down, where you either have a slight breach in form to where it may not necessarily become safe, or even when your repetitions start getting relatively slow out of necessity because your muscles are fatiguing, I tend to think for most individuals, that's probably about as hard as you have to push the intensity. And that goes back to why I use drop sets, pre-exhaust, forced repetitions, heavy negatives. I add those things in with clients to open their eyes that they're capable of exerting more effort, because everyone's got this kind of subconscious like limit that we think, okay, like this is hard, I'm done, I can't do anymore. And sometimes you really need to be pushed through that before you have a proper frame of reference with how hard you should really be exercising. So just be aware. That's probably pushing it hard enough. At least for me, I like the idea of knowing that I put 100% of myself into that set where I am mentally, physically, and sometimes even emotionally exhausted. And if you've ever had a set with a really good training partner, it doesn't matter if it's, leg press, doesn't matter if you're doing squats, whatever the movement is, and you feel almost like you want to cry after that set is done because you just put so much focus and effort into that. I like to try and push all of my sets as far as I can towards that direction. And I don't think that I'm getting necessarily a deeper degree of hypertrophy because of that. I just like that feeling that I put all of myself into that movement in that moment. But I don't think most people have to push it that far. Could we do a set starting with a hold and after that do negative? Yep. So I do that with some clients. I have a plate loaded pulley lat pull down machine, and an actual like pull down movement, you're going to have what's called a negative strength curve. You're actually strongest with your arms almost entirely overhead, and you get weaker as that position goes on. Same with a pull up. But due to the pulleys, if this machine didn't have any minor design flaws or friction or anything like that, you would have perfectly even resistance because the cable is just articulating around the machine and the weight is, getting lifted up as you're pulling the handle down. So that discrepancy between the negative strength curve of the movement and the perfectly even resistance curve imposed by the machine can cause what are called sticking points. And I found that for most of my clients and for myself included on that machine, when I'm starting to fatigue, I'll usually hit a point near the bottom, right around my eyes where it gets a little bit harder to pull through, and then right around the level of my chin. And when I'm doing pull downs, I try and get that bar all the way to my chest. So if you're aware of these things, you can kind of identify some of these design flaws that just happen in some of these machines. Unfortunately, it can kind of give the illusion that you're hitting momentary muscular failure when you're not necessarily. You could just be hitting a sticking point because that discrepancy between the strength curve of the movement and the resistance curve of the machine. Now, you have a few options in that regard. If you hit that point, and I'll get to the rest of your question in a second, I like to hold that position for at least 10 seconds, contracting as hard as you can. Otherwise, you can hold for a couple of seconds, you can let it up, and then you can do another partial repetition to that point. And that's kind of what I was discussing on the training footage video that you did for the Carnivore Crew Facebook group. But given that that machine that I have has that design flaw to where I end up getting a couple of sticking points in that exercise, I found it's more productive with clients to where I just have them do a static hold in the fully contracted position. And then I will have them hold that for between 60 and 90 seconds. And as their muscles fatigue and they hit that point where they're at isometric failure and they can no longer hold it and it slowly start going up, depending on how far they are into that set. This is why I use time under load. If they're closer to 60 seconds, when it gets a little bit higher up, I'll give them assistance to have them pull it back down and I will make them hold it essentially in that static position until about 90 seconds, and then it'll slowly raise up. So yeah, I think you absolutely could do a set holding a weight at a certain position, and eventually your isometric strength is going to fail. And if that isometric strength fails, it's not like if you're doing a bicep curl, when you reach the point where you're so fatigued that you can no longer hold that weight in that position, it's not like you're going to be able to curl it up at that point. It's going to start slowly going down. And the whole purpose of resistance training is to use the weights or to use the machines to inroad the musculature so you elicit the compensatory response of bigger, stronger muscles. So I do think if you can safely do it, holding a static to the point of isometric failure, and then slowly terminating the set as safely as you can, could potentially be more stimulating than a conventional set. Now, I'll admit that that's my speculation, and there's not really a lot of science looking at things like those set extenders. James Fisher and James Steele, and I think Bruce Lowe-Smith did a study looking at those types of set intensifiers. And I think that they found, and I'll try and look this up and put it in the comments if I remember, I think that they found that doing these types of set intensifiers provided no additional benefit, at least in the short-term study that they ran. But it's certainly worth a try. And I had a client back in 2014 that I trained out of my house that we hit a sticking point in his training. And all I had was a power rack and a bunch of free weights. So instead of having him do conventional bench presses, we took 2 or 3 weeks and we just did isometric holds on the bench press and really slow controlled negatives. So he would unrack the bench press. He would bend his arms maybe 10 to 15 degrees, just a slight bit, so we'd actually get some tension on the chest. And he would hold that as long as he could. And then as his muscles fatigued, I would help him do essentially one heavy negative. Then I would very quickly lift it up to the top, and he would do another 1 or 2 heavy negatives. Now, you have to be careful doing that on certain movements because things like a bench press or a shoulder press have a positive strength curve. You are much stronger with your arms nearly straight overhead or straight out during a bench press. So if you hit near momentary muscular failure on a bench press with your arms almost straight, that weight is going to come crashing down. And if you don't have a training partner, and if you're not doing that out of like a power rack where you have the safety bars set up to catch that bar to keep it from falling on you, doing things like that can be extremely dangerous. So I wouldn't recommend doing something like that without being able to properly and safely set that up. But yeah, it's absolutely worth the shot. And after having Matt do that for 2 or 3 weeks, by the time we went back to conventional bench presses, I was able to put like 10 or 15 more pounds on his bench like that next week. So I think they're every bit as effective. But again, I know that's a fringe position, and there's really not a lot of science outside of anecdotes to really substantiate that. So take that as you will. Jonathan said he has shaved his head many times. Trying to catch up my grip so I don't need straps to go up and deadlift. Yeah, that's I'd have to give that some thought. I have a lot of mixed feelings about wrist straps. I certainly understand their utility when performing certain movements. But to me, I never liked the idea of something being a limiting factor in my training. And I look at it kind of like the same way I look at like knee wraps. Knee wraps absolutely can help you have a stronger squat. Your squat might be 10 or 15 or 20 pounds heavier with properly tight knee wraps in the bench. But I don't think it actually makes you stronger in that movement. If you're using knee wraps to help support the joint and maintain stability, I think it's a good thing. But if the knee wraps tighten, compress kind of like a spring as you're bending your leg, and then they kind of help straighten things up as you're standing up, I tend to think that's probably actually taking away some of the overload from your legs. I would work grip work in to the end of your back and biceps day. For now, keep using the straps on the deadlift. Really focus hard on that grip work at the end of your sets, and they'll probably catch up to that point. There's a lot that goes into, depending on how you're executing bent over rows, deadlifts, or some of these other movements. There are times you may need straps. There are times you may not need straps. If you lift using relatively lighter weight like I do and using very, very slow concentrics, I don't need to use wraps at all. But if I were to do conventional deadlifts, I absolutely wouldn't need to strap up. So it's just something that you're going to have to think about. Tivana, hey, good people, don't skip leg day. Yeah. The number of videos I see online with bros with these really impressive upper bodies and pencil thin legs, it's a bit disconcerting. Leg day is on Monday with the girls. There's probably some kind of double meaning there that I'm not fully aware of. So that's fine. What do you think of stretching the neck or the upper trapezius muscles before using a lateral deltoid exercise such as the side dumbbell and machine raises? Is there any benefit? Yeah, I should have chewed on this one a little bit more, Jonathan. I know that you asked this question in the Carnivore Coaches Corner to Colt, and I think Mark had dipped out at that point. I don't think you fully got his answer. I would have to think about this some more. I know you said you had a reason that you were thinking this may be a good idea. My initial thought is if you're using a weight that you can control in a lateral raise, I don't think it would be necessary to stretch or to try and loosen up some of the muscles of the neck or maybe the upper traps a little bit. Now, if I was going to be so like when I do lateral raises, again, I do concentrics very, very slow. And I get it. That's a really unorthodox approach. But when I do lateral raises, I do 15s. And then I'll hold for at least 2 to 3 seconds, in that position all the way up. And I'll move very, very slow, probably at least 6 seconds in each direction. And that really limits the amount of weight that I can use. But if I was doing conventional lateral raises with, what did I even use when I trained that way? 35s or 40s. I could see the utility in that. A lot of times, doing shrugs, doing lateral raises, you can feel a lot of tightness in the neck. And I think there's a lot of bracing that people do in anticipation of that movement. I could see the validity in that, but I would really have to think about that. But my preliminary thoughts are a lot of that's going to come down to execution of the repetitions. But certainly if you were going to be doing anything more performance related, strongman, or maybe just you had to lift something really heavy in real life, I could see the benefit of warming that area up and stretching it up a little bit. But the way that I lift, I don't think it would be necessary. But for most people, at least now as kind of a cursory thought, for most people, I'd say, yeah, probably a good idea, but I'll definitely give that some more thought. Tivana says, my leg day is up and down mountains. Where do you live? Put in the comments. Let me know where you are. There's a lot of farmland out here in Wisconsin. Thankfully, I am by Lake Michigan, so I can go hike up some bluffs, but for the most part, a lot of farms, a lot of flat land around here. Here in Finland, we have a world champion in grip strength. It's fantastic. What is your greatest feat in the last few years regarding either building your business or your physique? I assume this is going to be probably more health and fitness related. I think I would have to say it's this business. Starting a business and actually running a personal training studio has been significantly more work than I ever would have anticipated. Everything I've needed in terms of permits, inspections, legal documents, getting my equipment, getting signage for my business, insurance, everything has been a giant pain in the ass, but the clients have been unbelievable. And when I opened my business, I thought I was going to be catering more towards busy professionals who didn't have a lot of time to exercise and wanted more of this minimalistic approach that I take and that I advocate. And I've found that I've really fallen into a niche where most of my work is people who are like on the other side of seeing physical therapists, where they might be cleared by their doctor or their physical therapist to do daily activity. But a lot of them have found that going to more conventional personal trainers, they're unable to do a lot of the things that these trainers want them to do. So I feel like I've really fallen into a gap, like when people are done with physical therapists, but still have a lot of health conditions that require special attention. And to give a couple of anecdotes, I have a 82-year-old that came to me probably a little over 6 months ago on a 4-point walker, the tennis balls on the front, that now she no longer has to use her 4-point walker. I have an 81-year-old that I signed up about 6 or 8 weeks ago that was starting to slouch over and wanted to correct her posture, and seeing her become more and more upright every single week has been really rewarding. I have a 70-year-old gentleman that was able to avoid shoulder surgery due to his osteoarthritis by doing shoulder traction, which is mostly just hanging and strengthening that joint. And I have a mom of 4 that has rheumatoid arthritis that can now run around and play with her kids. So between people with bad hips, knees, and some of these other conditions, these are people that couldn't work with most personal trainers. But these are people that really need it the most. And I get a bit heated sometimes because most of the clients I have will straight up tell me that their former personal trainers say, sorry, I can't do anything for you. And I kind of reject that notion. You either don't know how, in which case, you maybe shouldn't be doing what you're doing, or you don't want to, in which case, fuck you, because these are the people that really need it. So exercise, when safely performed, is a net benefit to the body of all ages and all capabilities. And if people can move, people can exercise. As much as I would love to just have more people in my studio that only have time to work out once a week or so, that want to look better naked and want to feel better about themselves and have more energy, the number of clients I have that are like that, I could probably count on one hand compared to the people that I have that really are just trying to almost live a normal life. So that's probably been the biggest accomplishment with starting this business, is the number of lives that I've been able to help, and how much those mean to me. Something like 75, maybe 80% of my clients have invited me over to dinner to meet their families. And not just for holidays, just randomly, unprompted, because of the impact and meaning that I've been able to impart on their lives, and because of what I've been able to give them because of their trust in me. And I really feel that I'm sort of serving a higher calling in that regard. And I would never give this business up because of that. There are people that need this too much, that, as much as I love bodybuilding, as much as I've been fascinated with the sport since I was a kid, as much as I love the golden era and like the idea of being on stage at, almost 0% body fat, flexing and posing, I still love that, but it's not the same as when people come to you in tears because they want to play with their kids and they can't, and then being able to help with that. So that's what's given me the most fulfillment, I think, is the word I want to use. Thank you for that question, Jonathan. How would I structure a purely bodyweight training for hypertrophy? Drew Bay has an excellent ebook called Project Kratos that essentially is all bodyweight equipment or exercises that you can do with yoga blocks or a toe strap. And I don't want to plug my own channel too much because I'm a guest on Jonathan's channel, but I did a video called $50 for all the gym equipment you need. And it's basically 2 yoga blocks, a yoga belt, and a heavy duty toe strap. And I really think that if you know what you're doing with that equipment, you can effectively overload any of the muscles in the body in a safe, effective, and efficient manner to produce size and strength increases. A lot of that is going to come down to exercise execution instead of performing specific movements. But in general, if you can just do a chest press, some kind of row, a pull-up, a basic squat, some kind of hip hinging movement like a deadlift, and what am I forgetting? Some kind of overhead press, that's going to get you probably at least 90% of the way there. And from there, you can start to specialize in some of these other areas. If you want to bring up your biceps, you could probably include some direct bicep movement. But more than anything else, what produces results is going to be hard work. You literally have to force your muscles to grow, as Mike Menzer once said, and then give them time to rest and recover. But if you wanted something that was as close to a plug and play program as you could, I would look at Project Kratos by Drew Bay. I think it's a $39 ebook. But Drew is an extremely intelligent guy. And if you look on his Facebook, he put out some pictures recently. He's about to turn 50, and you can see the physique that he has at his age. And if you look at training videos of him, he trains using some very slow movements, but he does a lot of isometric work. He does a lot of movements with just heavy duty toe straps. Um, and the man has a physique that most people would like to have at any age, let alone 50. But speaking more broadly, if I was to structure a pure bodyweight routine for hypertrophy, aside from looking at the basic movements, squat, pull-ups, overhead press, I would probably start 3 times a week if you're brand new to training, probably 2 to 3 sets per body part. And then as you get better with increasing the amount of intensity that you're using on your workouts, you can start dialing back the volume and frequency. But ultimately, the amount of exercise that you're going to be able to tolerate in a single session and how often you're going to be able to train is going to be largely genetically mediated, with diet having a strong influence. And I'm meticulous about writing down every single thing I do in the gym. And at least for a long time, you should be making progress almost every single workout. Not necessarily every one, but probably at least 8 out of 10 workouts. You should be making progress every single time, week after week, month after month, for probably at least the first year or so. And if you hit this patch where you're really not making progress for a long period of time, at that point, you'll probably have to adjust volume and frequency. In which case, I would highly recommend a phone consultation with Jonathan. He could set you straight in a fraction of the time that it would cost you to have to try and figure that shit out on your own. And consultation with Jonathan is still by far the cheapest body composition coach online, and somebody that I would absolutely endorse without the slightest bit of hesitation. I can't say enough wonderful things about him and the service that he provides for his clients. But those are the basic fundamental principles. Hit all the main body movements, start 3-ish times a week, 2 to 3 sets. And as you get better, you can dial back the volume and the frequency. But I can't really go into more specifics than that. Check out Project Kratos, Drew Bay. Look at videos of him training. And if you have any further questions, absolutely book a consultation with Jonathan. Rick says, you speak the truth about bodybuilders. I have a friend who's really into bodybuilding, always looked awesome, but never felt like he did. He's blonde, but for some reason hated that too. Yeah, bodybuilders are a unique breed. And part of me likes the good enough never is mindset, because there's a lot of utility to that. It can inspire you. It can motivate you to hold yourself to a higher standard, personally, professionally, in relationships, whatever it is. That can be a really good thing. But if you never achieve a level of satisfaction, if you're constantly focusing on that 1% that isn't good enough, that's not necessarily healthy either. So there's a weird balance, I think a lot of bodybuilders have to find. But I think, unfortunately, a lot of times what draws people to the structured, disciplined lifestyle of bodybuilding, aside from having a certain genetic proclivity for it, is oftentimes it really buys into this me against the world mindset. Not that all bodybuilders are that way, because they're not. The longer you're around this sport and the more people you talk to, you find a lot of people that have serious trust issues. And because of that, they want to do everything on their own. And they like the idea of just, it's me against the world and it's my way. And this is exactly how it has to be. And I'm not speaking about Jonathan when I say this, so I hope it doesn't come across that way. It's just, you start recognizing patterns, the more you do anything in life. And you probably see it in different jobs too. I worked in retail for a long time. And after a while, you start seeing that a lot of retail draws certain personality types. And people that do really well at my former employer tend to be people that don't have families, don't have kids. Their job is their life. And there's nothing wrong with that, if that's the life that they want, if that's what they want to do. But it's very easy for people that don't share the same commonality of values to look at that and just be like, I don't get it. So everyone's got their own nuances and their own quirks, right? Jonathan says, when using intensifiers such as slow negatives or static contractions, how do you know when enough is enough? Is there a sticking point in lift, or is the pain level we shouldn't exceed? I think I would, and I don't want to be pedantic, exercise should be extremely uncomfortable. Pain, I think we have to be careful with that word, because lactic acid buildup can certainly be extremely uncomfortable and possibly painful. But there are different types of pain. So I'm always a little careful about that word. I think I generally say that exercise should never be painful, but it should be extremely uncomfortable. How would you know when you've done enough? If using things like slow negative static contractions. For most people, um, again, my mentality, I like pushing that envelope as hard as I can, period. And if I have a training partner, um, I will have them help me do force repetitions, heavy negatives until I can't lift my arms or until I can't move my legs. And then that one set is done and that muscle group is done. But that's me. If I'm working with clients, I sprinkle those in really, really gingerly. And the way that I like to do it, and again, I lift very, very slowly. And I generally use a set duration with most people between 60 and 90 seconds. And there are reasons for that I won't elaborate on too long. But in general, if I have somebody that hits positive failure between 60 and 90 seconds, then I know that the weight that I'm using, the way that I train, is a good amount of weight for them. But if they hit that degree of failure, concentric failure, they're trying to lift it, it's not moving at 75 seconds, then I make everybody I have basically work up to 90 seconds. And I think it just makes the workouts a little bit more consistent. And it gives them a little bit of nuance, that there's a little bit more intensity, a little bit more effort that they can give. In a lot of ways, you make them see that they're capable of more than they may think they're capable of doing. So if they hit concentric failure at 75 seconds, I will note that in the progress chart after the set, and I time everything with a stopwatch, but then I will make them statically hold that for the last 15 seconds. Or if it starts going down, I'll make them lower that as slowly as they can. Or if they hit that a little closer to the 60-second mark and I want to stretch that set to 90 seconds, that's when I'll start doing more forced repetitions or heavy negatives. If you're at the point in your training where you're legitimately able to do slow negatives or static contractions, you're probably training hard enough. And I said earlier in this podcast that I think these intensifiers make a disproportionately large inroad to your recovery ability. So if you can normally train 3 days a week, and then you start doing set intensifiers on literally every single set, pushing that as much intensity as you're capable of generating, I don't think you can train 3 times a week like that. I think, at that point, you might only be able to train twice a week, or depending on your genetics, you can maybe only train once a week doing that style of training, maybe even less frequently than that. So Matt, the same client that I mentioned earlier, that I had him doing isometric holds and then heavy negatives on his bench press, at the end of our time together, he was only doing 6 total sets once every 10 to 14 days. But it wasn't until I got him down to being that infrequent that he continued to make progress. So these are things that have to be used with consideration. How is this going to fit into somebody's lifestyle? Is this going to make them so tired and exhausted either the rest of the day or possibly the next day or two that they're not going to want to come back? Intensifiers are interesting that way. Like I said, I like pushing my sets as hard as I can every single set. But for most people, I think it's just a tool to give perspective that people can work harder than they think they can. Jonathan, thank you for the kind shout out. You didn't have to do that. Andre, how you doing? Do you have any advice for someone who has trouble reaching failure on the leg press? I have problems to do one set to failure on leg press, squats, and deadlifts. If you're having trouble doing one set to failure, do 2 or 3 sets is probably the easiest thing. And there's a number of reasons that somebody may not be capable of going to momentary muscular failure, and safety is the biggest reason to not take something to failure, especially with a free weight movement like a squat, deadlift, bench press. Unless you have a really good training partner, or unless you are very carefully training out of a power rack that has guides set up to catch that bar, I don't think those movements should be performed to failure, because there's a lot of risk that goes into that. What I would recommend, if you're having trouble doing those more compound exercises to failure, get as close to failure as you can. And on something like a leg press, if you don't think you can do another full repetition of momentary muscular failure, depending on where the guides are, that whatever you set to stop the bar from coming down so far, you can still do partial repetitions at that point. Um, Squats, I probably wouldn't do to failure. You could always do something like a squat as close to failure as you could, and then you could superset it with like a leg extension or a leg curl, depending on what you're trying to do. But if you're more determined to use things like a bench press, a squat, an overhead press, some of these more free weight movements compared to machine movements, if you can't get to momentary muscular failure in one set, do 2 or 3 sets, and just push as hard as you safely can in those sets, and that'll probably be sufficient. What training advice would you give to someone with compartmental, excuse me, arthritis in the knee joint? Yeah, any kind of arthritis, I try and identify the positions in the range of movements that is starting to be problematic. Wouldn't necessarily train somebody any different that had arthritis in the knee. I would just use limited ranges of movement or possibly isometrics to still work the muscles that innervate that joint, but do so in a way that in a position of the range of movement that doesn't cause that same degree of irritation. So you still want to train those muscles hard so the muscles release myokines and have a positive effect on the composition of that joint. That's how I would kind of handle the training part of it. If somebody, isometrics are really good, I think, in that regard. But probably the biggest thing I would look at with anybody that comes to me with any kind of autoimmune condition, arthritis, diet's usually the first thing I recommend. And unfortunately, having a personal training studio, it's one of the factors that I don't really have a control of. I don't really do phone consultations. I do, but it's not my favorite thing to do. But if you're looking for a way to very quickly improve a lot of inflammation, a lot of arthritic conditions, diet is number one. And there are training modalities that you can use around that. But I would have somebody drop their carbs as low as they can consistently adhere to, try and get quality of sleep, probably increase their water intake a little bit, do some grounding. And after making those recommendations, then I would kind of talk them through how I do things here in the studio. It probably wouldn't use any kind of like leg press, but we'd still do leg extensions, leg curls, like adduction and abduction. We would still do everything we could to try and articulate that particular joint that had that condition. We just want to do so in a way that doesn't naturally produce any kind of aggravation or irritation. Zbigniew says, I noticed that during the last HIIT training doing pull down, my biceps and forearms are so aching that I can't pull down more. Should I use straps or do different exercises engaging separately lats? Yeah, so the biceps and the forearms definitely can be a limiting factor. And there's a number of things that can go into that. And a lot of that discomfort can just be because you have more sensory nerves in your biceps or in your forearms compared to in your lats. That would be a good example of a time that you may want to use straps. If you can do any kind of pullover movement, you could always pre-exhaust the lats with like a cable pullover, or if your gym has a pullover machine, that'd be a good idea too. Otherwise, you could do a cable pull in. If you can reach up kind of the side and pull your humerus inwards and also slightly backwards, you can kind of pre-exhaust the lats that way. Proprioception is a bit wonky though sometimes. Just because you're feeling something more in certain muscle groups, it doesn't mean that what you're trying to hit isn't getting adequately worked. This is one of those that if you're talking about a specific video that you put out, I think I'd like to have a look at it. But if you're looking at the total volume of the muscles that are involved in a pull down, at least in terms of three-dimensional volume, not surface area, the volume of the biceps, the brachialis, the brachioradialis, things that function in lower arm flexion or elbow flexion, I believe collectively are slightly bigger than the actual lats themselves. So when we're doing pull downs, sometimes we can feel it significantly more, and we may think that our biceps or forearms are being a limiting factor, but I don't know if I necessarily buy into that idea. If you can, and you want to be sure about it, try and do some kind of pre-exhaust movement for the lats. Otherwise, having straps would be a good idea. But even if you're strapping up, that's only going to largely remove the forearm involvement. You're still going to get some bicep involvement. Otherwise, if you have those hanging straps that people use a lot to do hanging leg raises, and I have a pair in my studio, I don't have one sitting next to me now. I have clients with rheumatoid arthritis and carpal tunnel that I will have them do that. And it largely takes out a lot of the bicep involvement and most of the forearm involvement in a pull down. Otherwise, that's an excellent question for Jonathan. I'm going to try and plug consultations for Jonathan as much as I can in this video. Jonathan says, I would give you a super chat, but I would be paying myself. I owe you a pint of Alpine water. Thank you. And when I eventually come to the UK, I'll take you up on that. Andre says, thanks. So I'm going to give this video 5 more minutes. I had a client that had an earlier appointment that may be coming in at 2 o'clock my time in 5 minutes. So I want to keep that time slot available. Andre says he has one more question. So if anybody has any more questions, get them in now. And even if I can't answer them, I will make note of them. And Jonathan and I, and hopefully Sophie, if she's there, we'll get to it on the next video. Andre says, one more question. When training for hypertrophy, would you advise doing 1 set to failure, multiple exercises, 2 to 3 per body part, 2 to 3 times a week, or would you suggest more volume? If you are able to truly go to failure, anywhere from 1 to probably 3 sets per body part is probably sufficient. If you're really going to failure, I don't think most people pushing hard enough can tolerate much more than that. But again, most people really struggle to go to momentary muscular failure. When I worked at my last job, before I opened the studio, one of my favorite things to do was to take people that were into health and fitness to the gym with me, and I would put them through a workout because I had a reputation as a guy that didn't train very long and trained very infrequently, but still looked pretty good. So I would take people that were personal trainers on the side or were into health and fitness or bodybuilding, and I would take them to the gym and I would put them through one of my workouts. And one of my favorite examples was a young lady that is a certified personal trainer. She works a second job. And I had her on leg extensions. And my plan was to have her superset leg extensions into a leg press. The whole leg workout was, I think, 4 sets. So she gets on leg extensions. She hits number 15 on her own and says she's done. She hit failure. I egged her on a little bit, and without her stopping, she got up to, I think, 23 on her own. And then I made her do forced repetitions till the point where I thought she hit what I would call real momentary muscular failure. From there, she hobbled over to the leg press, could barely do leg press, 1 set of leg curls, and then she cramped up on 1 set of calf raises. So I think with enough intensity, 1 to maybe 3 sets of muscle group is probably sufficient. But if you can't get that much intensity, if you can't train to muscular failure, you're going to need a little bit more volume. And the frequency, I think, is going to come down more to your recovery ability. So whatever amount of volume you're doing in your workout, if you're relatively new to strength training, train Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or train every other day. And if you start noticing after a time as you're getting stronger, where you kind of hit a plateau in most, if not all exercises, then I would consider reducing either the amount of exercise volume that you're doing at that point. If you're doing 3 sets of muscle group, maybe take it down to 2. Or if you're doing, 3 to 4 exercises for a muscle group, reduce that a little bit. And if you're already down to 1 or maybe 2 sets at that point, then instead of 3 times a week, I'd probably look at going to 2 times a week. But these are all knobs that you have to dial. And a lot of it's dependent on how hard you can push those sets. And a lot of that's going to be dependent on your diet too. I know I train very, very minimal compared to a lot of people. I do basically 1 set per muscle group, depending on how you're defining it. And I train once every 3 to 4 days doing a push-pull leg split. So call that whatever volume and frequency you want to. But it takes a lot to get to that point. And if my genetics would allow me to train more frequently, I would train more frequently because I like the mental benefit of pushing myself hard in the gym. And I like pushing a set to where I feel like I'm going to throw up. I like doing leg presses so hard that I want to cry by the time the set's over. And Lord knows there have been times where I've had tears running down my face when a set's over. I like that feeling. But not everybody has to push that hard. So I'm sorry, I can't give a more precise answer than that, but I hope that answers your question. Jonathan says, thank you for hosting, providing excellent answers across the board. Jonathan, thank you for this opportunity. I hope I did it justice. It's, again, a tremendous honor to be on your channel at all, let alone, solely hosting a video. Spigniew says, awesome. Thank you, Jerome. Just hit deadlift PR with mixed grip. Yeah. What was that PR? And if I cut the live video short before you can get that in there, throw it in the comments below. I'd be really curious. I want to give you a big shout out, an allegorical pat on the back for that. Oh, and there we go. Next comment. It's only 3 plates plus progress. But you know what? Like, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if it's 1 plate. If that's the PR and if that's what gets you pumped up and makes you feel good, then that's fucking awesome. And that should be applauded. So 3 plates, 5 plates, 10 plates. Awesome job. Awesome job. Andre says, thank you very much. Jerome is the best. Second best. Jonathan is the best. But thank you. Strongly advise you to subscribe to his channels only if you are first subscribed to this channel that you're currently watching me on, Jonathan Griffiths, the composition consultant. I am going to wrap this up, guys. Thank you, everybody, for your time. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Otherwise, even better would be paying for a consultation with Jonathan. He has by far the best rates online for any body composition coach. Not only does he have the best prices, I think he has top shelf quality service. Nobody's going to give you that much work. Nobody's going to give you the dedication and the time and the knowledge. And nobody's information is as good as Jonathan. So I would highly recommend consulting with him if you have any questions. Thank you, everybody, for your time. Have a wonderful Easter weekend, and I will talk to you guys soon.